Hello and welcome to my channel, Rhino here. Today we're looking at another video from Impact Video Ministries, but this time instead of an impact breakdown, it's one of their whiteboard videos on the problem of evil. So let's take a look.
And if you look at all the shootings, the wars, the poverty, the political corruption, and all the death around the world, one can ask the question, if there really is a God, why doesn't he do something about all of this?
One could ask that question, but a better question in my opinion is why did he make it like this in the first place? But yeah, if God is all-knowing, all-powerful, omnipresent, and perfectly benevolent, evil should not exist. If you are on the side of a busy street at the bottom of a hill, and you see someone at the top of the hill has let go of their stroller with a child in it, and it's careening down the hill toward the busy street, all you have to do is reach out and stop the stroller and you'll save the kid's life. You have the power to do it. You have the knowledge that this is all you need to do, and you have the opportunity. If you were to just stand there and watch the stroller roll out into traffic, no, wait, that's a bad analogy. God is omnipresent after all. If you were to actively move yourself out of the way to allow the stroller to roll into traffic, would anyone be tempted to refer to you as perfectly good? Well, in this same scenario, if God is omnipresent, then not only is he there watching the stroller roll down the hill, but the stroller is actually rolling through him. Yet God is supposed to be perfectly good? He has been present at every crime and atrocity ever committed, and has had the ability to stop it, but he's allowed it to continue anyway.
So the question is, why do bad things happen if there's such a loving God? Now let's assume for a moment that there wasn't a God. Let's say that humans were not created and that we all slowly evolved over the process of millions of years.
I mean, the existence of a God does not preclude evolution. Maybe that's how God decided to create us. Because evolution happens. It is a fact. If you're trying to harmonize the existence of a loving God with the existence of evil, and your starting point for that harmonization is to dismiss the vast majority of the science of biology, then you've already lost the argument.
During these millions of years, animals that were more fit would have a higher chance of survival against predators and obstacles nature gives. This is known as survival of the fittest. The fit survive, and they reproduce, while the weak get eaten or die.
Okay, it's clarification time. Survival of the fittest is not about being physically fit in the sense that we picture it today, being physically stronger. It's about being the best fit for your environment and having the most reproductive success. With this definition, I, with my pudgy dad bod, am more fit than a bodybuilder who has no kids, because I have 3 kids. So if I die of a heart attack tomorrow because of my love of potato chips, and the bodybuilder goes on to have a long, successful but child-free life, I was still, evolutionarily speaking, more fit because I reproduced more. As far as evolution is concerned, that's all that matters.
If the world we live in was purely biological, then survival of the fittest would be the main law of the land. We as humans would only be here on Earth due to pure chance. We evolved, populated the world, and will one day die just like everything else.
Well, we did evolve and populate the Earth, and we all will one day die. That's how life works.
It's not bad to die, it's just what happens.
Well, at the end of the day, if death is actually the end, there's nothing else after that, then no, it's not necessarily bad to die. But how we feel about it is important. I'm not ready to die yet. There are things that I still want to experience, and I want to be there for my kids as they grow up. But if I die right now, I will cease to have any opinion on the matter. So in that sense, no, it's not necessarily bad.
Now let's look back at the question, why do bad things happen if there's such a loving God? This question would assume that bad things happen.
Yes, bad things happen. Are you about to attempt to argue that we are unable to consider things bad if God doesn't exist? Because all that is required for bad to be a property of something is for us to not like it. We have preferences. Something that goes against our preferences is considered bad. Something that lines up with our preferences is considered good. I would prefer not to stub my toe. If I should happen to stub my toe, I consider this bad, because I would prefer it to not have happened. That's all that the concepts of good and bad really boil down to, are personal preferences.
I mean, think about it. If there was no God, we would just be advanced animals roaming the land. And when you see a lion eating a gazelle, the lion didn't murder the gazelle, the lion killed and ate to survive.
That's kind of a definitional thing, though, isn't it? The lion didn't murder the gazelle because we define murder as an unlawful killing. There is no law against lions killing gazelles, so there cannot have been a murder. And on top of that, any animal requires other organisms to die in order to sustain its own life, whether it be other animals dying or plants. Death is necessary for the continuation of life. Sure, as humans, we do consider animal death to be more shocking and relatable, but that's because we thinking and feeling beings can anthropomorphize our thoughts and feelings onto animals that have similar cognitive capabilities. And, in fact, that's why killing some animals is more shocking to us than others. We are better at relating to animals that are more like us. That's why we take cats and dogs into our homes and treat them as members of the family, but we aren't overly fussed when we stumble upon the dead body of a cricket.
And when you see a shark forcibly copulate with another shark, it didn't rape the shark, it just mated to reproduce.
Yeah, we as humans who have a well-developed sense of empathy can look at something like that and be put off by it. But sharks don't have the same emotional range as we do. There is no rape because there is no consent. And that begs another question. If God is the source of morality and he made everything good, then why do so many species propagate through an act that humans consider heinous? Did Eve disobeying God cause sharks to fundamentally change their mating habits from consensual to force? It seems to me that one of the better ways to point out humanity's fallen nature would be to have the entire animal kingdom behave in accordance with God's perfect morality in order to provide a stark contrast between their behavior and human behavior. The idea of forcing suffering onto animals because humans made a mistake just seems cruel and unnecessary, which actually seems to be a defining characteristic of the biblical God.
Humans would be no different from animals. You see, there's a lot of Christianity critics that say, look at all the poverty, look at all the poor children who die, look at the millions of deaths. And to them, I'd say, if there was no God, those deaths wouldn't be wrong because under their worldview, the weak die and the strong live on.
You know, I'm getting a bit tired of apologists asserting that they know all the ins and outs of other people's worldviews that don't match up with theirs. Clearly you know that my worldview must bring me to the conclusion that no death is tragic. Come on. We have feelings. We care for people. There are people that we enjoy spending time with. When those people die, we are sad because we no longer get to spend time with them. When we know someone else lost a loved one, we can empathize with them because we know how it feels. It really is that simple.
People dying couldn't be called wrong or bad. It would just be nature.
Realistically, it's wrong or bad because of how we feel about it. Same as my toe stubbing example. It's not some universal truth that stubbing toes is bad. Stubbing toes is just something that happens in nature, but it hurts us, so we consider it to be bad. And should someone force a toe stubbing onto someone else, we would tend to label that action as wrong, because we can agree that we don't want to stub our toes, so allowing someone to run around forcing other people to stub their toes is undesirable.
Let's look at the word bad for just a moment. If you think about it, we can't understand the word bad unless there was something good.
Bad and good are simply adjectives that we apply based on our preferences. In the absence of tragedy, we might call things bad that really aren't all that bad, but these are relative terms that don't have any apparent universally applicable measuring stick.
For example, poverty is bad, murder is wrong, and discrimination is wrong.
Yes, poverty is bad because we have a preference toward not being hungry and having nice things. Murder is wrong because I prefer not to be murdered, and most people are capable of recognizing that nobody wants to be murdered, so we can all agree to have strict punishments for murderers. And nobody prefers to be discriminated against because we prefer not to see other people getting preferential treatment based on arbitrary characteristics like skin color, gender, or who they are or are not attracted to. It's all based on societal preferences.
Yes, these things are wrong, but the reason why we know that these are wrong is because in our minds, we know that there's supposed to be justice.
No, we don't know that they are wrong because we know there's supposed to be justice. We know they are wrong because we can empathize with people in those situations. At least to a degree. The discrimination one is a bit more tricky because evolution has wired us to care more for people that we consider to be in our tribe than those that are considered outsiders. And while the world is generally getting better at it, current political climate in the US notwithstanding, there is still much more progress that needs to be made in getting everyone to view all of humanity as their tribe instead of just those who look and act like themselves.
You see, for every wrong thing, deep down, we know that there should be something that's right.
So when a child gets cancer and we consider that to be wrong, we know deep down that that child should not have cancer, that it would be right for that child to not have cancer. So if the child not having cancer is what is right, then how is God not wrong for having created a world in which childhood cancer is commonplace? You're appealing to our moral intuitions here, and I think most people would agree that cancer in general is a bad thing, and is even worse when it shows up in kids. But yet we can look at the God who created childhood cancer and call that God good?
So to understand bad, you need good.
Bad and good are points on a spectrum. Chop off either end of the spectrum where the worst bad and the best good lie, and we still have bad and good. It's just not as bad or as good.
But that's not enough. Sure, you have good and bad, but now you need a standard or some law to tell you what's good and what's bad.
Why do good and bad have to have an external source? I don't need someone else to tell me that I don't like bubblegum ice cream. Why would I need someone else to tell me that I don't like being murdered? The difference here is that my dislike of bubblegum ice cream is nowhere near universal, but the vast majority of people can agree that they dislike being murdered. So, bubblegum ice cream, no matter how much of an atrocity it is in my personal opinion, has no grounds for being made illegal because too many people do not share my opinion. Murder, though, is an almost universally disliked action, so everyone can get behind a law saying that murder is not allowed, and people who commit murder will be removed from the general population. We didn't need some non-human supreme entity to show up and tell us that we don't like being murdered.
If we don't have a standard to tell us what's right and what's wrong, people could do whatever they want.
Yes, but we live in a society filled with other people, all of whom have their own moral standards. So we have to learn to live together with these people, and laying some ground rules certainly helps with that. These ground rules are not the source of our morality. We don't look at the law and say we shouldn't steal because it's against the law. We don't steal because we have empathy and we know that we don't want people stealing from us. And so we would prefer to live in a society where stealing is frowned upon. So we codify this into our laws.
There has to be some moral standard humans live by, because for some reason, people have this desire to protect and to preserve life and well-being.
Because we want our life and our well-being to be protected, we can see the advantage to living in a society that offers certain protections for your life and your well-being. This doesn't require an external standard, and in fact, different societies have come to different conclusions as to what protections should exist. If there were some universal moral standard by which all humans strive to live, then you would expect morality to be the same across cultures, but with the exception of a few very basic principles, cultures disagree wildly on all sorts of moral positions.
For the question, why do bad things happen if there's such a loving God? My argument is this: bad things cannot make sense aside from good things.
And since bad and good at a societal level are entirely dependent on our collective opinions as to what is bad and what is good, with no apparent external force doing anything to influence these opinions, God need not enter the equation.
In order to distinguish whether a thing is good or bad, you need some moral law or standard.
As I said, good and bad are on a spectrum. Some good things are more good than others, and some bad things are more bad than others. I consider bubblegum ice cream to be bad, but I would rather eat bubblegum ice cream than have my car stolen. Being forced to eat an ice cream cone of a flavor I don't like would not be pleasant, but if I had to choose between the two, I wouldn't give it a second thought. As such, there need not be any sort of external standard to tell me which things are good and bad. We just need other things to compare them to in order to decide how good or bad they are relative to the other things that we're aware of. And on things that people can agree are considered bad by most people, we can agree to make laws to protect people from those particular bad things. The laws of a culture reflect the morality of the people living in that culture. They do not determine it.
And in order to have this moral law, you need someone capable of giving us these moral laws, or a moral law giver.
We are perfectly capable of figuring out moral laws for ourselves, thanks. We don't need them to be forced onto us externally. And if the particular moral law that you're talking about is the one that's found in the Bible, our morality has evolved past such tribalistic thinking for the most part. There are a few things that we can agree with, sure, but most of it is considered irrelevant, even by Christians. Though most will still claim to at least try and follow God's law, they will ignore the parts of it that are too difficult and have no apparent moral application, like, for instance, the proclamation against wearing a garment made from two types of material. I'd be willing to bet that most Christians in the world have worn cotton polyester blends without thinking twice about it. And in the same verse, it tells you not to sow your fields with two kinds of seed. As a hobby gardener, I can tell you that you can help your plants if you look into which plants are compatible with each other. Different plants need different nutrients, so you can maximize your garden space by planting plants with different requirements in the same spot. And what about not letting your cattle breed with a different kind? If we're going with the creationist definition of kind, that shouldn't even be possible in the first place, but if we just think of it as different breeds of cattle, selective breeding is pretty integral to modern farming, and most people don't consider it to be morally wrong. Though we do seem to be coming around as a society to considering the life of the animals that we use as food as being important, so even people who still eat meat generally will want the animal that they are eating to have had a reasonably comfortable life. So in this one verse, we find 3 proclamations that don't even occur to people nowadays as even potentially being immoral, and this is supposed to be the perfect universal moral standard? I haven't even touched on verses that promote immorality, like the one that explains the proper protocol for selling your daughter as a sex slave. And sure, it could be said that this verse offers protection for the woman in a society that didn't treat women very well, but if we were given the perfect moral law from the perfect moral lawgiver, then would he not have said to treat women as equals rather than as property? Even in the 10 Commandments, the section of the Old Testament law that modern Christians will reference the most, in number 10, it counts women as being among your neighbor's possessions. Couldn't the perfect moral lawgiver have instead given us a law that insists we treat women as people? Is that really too much to ask?
Why? Because morals cannot emerge from only a biological world.
Why not? They show every sign of evolving just like we do. In fact, it appears as though morality evolves faster than biology. We are essentially biologically identical to the people that wrote the Bible, but our morality has advanced quite a bit in that time.
If we were only biological, the only real law would be survival of the fittest.
Yes, survival of the fittest is the main driving force behind our morality. Because, as stated earlier, fittest in this context does not necessarily equate to strongest, but rather best fit for the environment in which it lives. The environment we live in is a social one, so people that follow the social rules are a better fit than those who do not. Ergo, society's moral laws are a direct result of survival of the fittest.
So if people die, it's not wrong, it's just nature running its course.
I mean, I think everyone knows that they will die eventually, and a death of natural causes is not usually considered to be wrong. Sad, sure. Wrong, not usually. Unless we're talking about kids again, in which case wrong is just our way of expressing the idea that we feel they should have had a longer life. Any negative feelings associated with death come from a place of loving the person who died and wanting to spend more time with them. From a Christian perspective, death should be celebrated though, shouldn't it? It's the end of pain and suffering. They're in heaven now. You get to go see them again later. So the real question is, why are Christians sad when their loved ones die?
All this to say, why do bad things happen if there's such a loving God? My response would be, bad things can't be bad unless there's a God.
I can't know that stubbing my toe hurts and that I don't like stubbing my toe unless God first tells me that stubbing my toe is painful. Right.
So there's one argument for the head. Now let's talk to the heart. So let's assume then that there is a God and that the God we're talking about is the God of the Bible. If God is so loving, like scriptures describe him, why would he allow bad things to happen?
Well, the first thing that pops into my head is that it's because the scriptures do not actually describe him as loving. He commands the Israelite army to slaughter men, women, and children indiscriminately for the crime of living in the wrong city, except for when he orders them to save the young girls for themselves. He torches entire cities for the crime of either being gay or breaking the rules of hospitality, depending on who you ask. And he saves people from that city that he deems righteous, and the act that earns him the title of righteous is to offer his daughters up for gang rape. He kills the righteous man's wife for the crime of looking back at her home as it burns. He messes with Pharaoh's free will so that he can show off for the Egyptians, an act that culminates in the killing of all the Egyptians' firstborn children. He allows Satan to torture a man and kill his family in order to win a bet. The God of the Bible is not depicted as all-loving, despite on occasion being described as such. That's the easiest answer to the problem of evil. God allows evil because he simply isn't all-loving. But something tells me you're going to take the mysterious ways path instead.
First off, it wasn't God's intention to have a world full of death and corruption.
Which brings up another point. If God is perfect and all-powerful, how could anything possibly go any other way than exactly how he intends it to go? If he intended the world to be perfect, it would be perfect. If it doesn't go according to his intentions, then the only reason that could happen is if he weren't all-powerful, or if he didn't intend it to be perfect.
When God first created the world, it was described as being perfect and without any death.
Yeah, well, as described earlier, for animals to live, other organisms must die, even if it's just plants. I mean, there are also animals like felines that are obligate carnivores, and they have to eat other animals in order to survive. But even just ignoring them, the plant material that is ingested by an animal dies during the digestion process, as its cells are ripped apart and stripped of their nutrients. So really, when you say no death, do you mean no macroscopic death? No animal death? It can't just be a complete no-death scenario, because that's not possible. And it makes it quite clear that eating plants was definitely a thing. And again, if it had been perfect, then it would still be perfect. If it has a fatal flaw that can send it all to shit, then either that flaw was planned by God, or God was incapable of doing better.
He created the sun, moon, and stars, land and sea, animals and people. And God gave man the ability to make choices. And this is also something that God says is good. You see, if God wanted to, he could end all the bad things on earth. He could hypothetically create a state in which it would be impossible for anyone to do anything wrong.
Or, what he could have done, and what I have suggested before in previous videos, is he could only create people that he knows will freely choose to do good. He knows all of our choices before we're born, and if the Bible is to be believed, he has an active hand in creating us in the womb, so simply create those of us who choose to be good over bad, and don't create those of us who choose to be bad over good. Also, while he's at it, maybe cut it out with the earthquakes, hurricanes, fires, parasites, diseases, all that stuff that we call bad, but that isn't based entirely on human actions. He also could have created a world where the worst bad thing that is even possible is mild compared to the ones that we have now. He could have just flat out made it impossible for us to kill each other, leave us with the will, but just make it a physical law of the universe that humans cannot kill each other. We can still have free will, but we're unable to carry out the bad action. There are a myriad of ways that God could have gone about making a better world than the one we have now, all while keeping free will intact. And if I, a mere mortal, can think of some, then surely an all-powerful, all-knowing creator of the universe could think of an even better one. And on top of it all, there's literally nothing in the Bible that says that God actually gave us free will. In fact, God has regularly violated free will throughout the Bible, showing that free will is not, in fact, the deciding factor that constrains God to designing a universe that allows bad things to happen. And then, if free will were what God was after, and the universe having evil is a necessary consequence of the existence of free will, does that mean there's no free will in heaven? All Christians that I have conversed with are under the impression that all human beings sin and are fallible. The Bible supports this. It is very clear on the matter. But then you go to heaven, where sin no longer exists. But if sin is the result of free will, then free will cannot exist in heaven.
However, if God did this, people wouldn't have any freedom. They would be forced into doing what's right.
Or, again, he could allow them to have the will to do what is wrong, allow them to go through the motions, but then intervene and stop it at the last minute before anyone gets hurt. It still allows them to have the will to do evil, and it allows them to perform the actions leading up to it, but it doesn't hurt anyone. Again, me, a mere mortal, coming up with systems that are far superior to the one that God actually put in place.
This forced life, in God's eyes, isn't good. You see, God is a God of love, and he wants to establish a genuine, loving relationship with people. And in order for love to be genuine, there has to be a choice.
If God is perfectly loving and loves everyone unconditionally, and couldn't be any other way because that's his nature, does that mean that his love is not genuine since he doesn't have a choice in the matter?
When we see the news of all the terrorism, the shootings, and the corruption in the world, we normally hate the people responsible. And while we do want justice, God still wants these corrupt people to go to heaven.
First, hate is a strong word. I tend to not hate people, even the really bad ones. But that's not the point here. The point is that if you do hate these people, but God still loves them and wants them to go to heaven, then that means that God instilled a moral code on you that is different than the one he has for himself. The implication there being that even in this system that you're describing, there is no one singular universal moral code.
You see, while this world is full of killers and people who committed heinous crimes, God still has a heart to save them.
Save them from what, you ask? What he'll do to them if they don't love him. Love me or I'll torture you does not strike me as the kind of system someone would set up if they were actually after a freely chosen relationship.
According to the Bible, when someone dies, they either go to heaven or they go to hell. There is no middle ground, and people aren't able to switch locations. Once someone dies, they enter into what's called the eternal state, meaning they will forever dwell in heaven or they will forever dwell in eternal torment full of darkness, flames, and never-ending agony.
Did you hear that? I often shy away from bringing up hell as eternal torment because I know this is one point of disagreement among Christians. Some believe that hell is only torment until you have been adequately punished for whatever evil you did on earth, and then you blink out of existence. Some think the same thing, but when you're done, you go to heaven. Some think that your existence ends after the apocalypse stuff from the Book of Revelations happens. Others call it torment, but believe it's nothing more than an existence separate from God, and it's torment because now you understand why you really wanted a relationship with God to begin with. So it's eternal emotional torture, I guess. Still others consider hell to be nothing more than a metaphor. But here you are, spelling it out. Hell is eternal physical torture for people who don't believe in God. A God that creates such a place is not consistent with the picture that you painted earlier of a God who actually loves everyone unconditionally and wants them all to go to heaven.
God knows that once people die, people are locked in their choice of heaven or hell.
And there it is. It's not God sending you to hell. You choose to go to hell. Doesn't matter that you didn't have reason to believe that hell even existed before you die. You can't change your mind afterward. What kind of loving being insists that you decide to love them back before you can even know they exist, and then tortures you for all eternity for not making the right choice? The rest of their video just gets into the pain and suffering caused by disease and natural disaster and whatnot, and as predicted, their explanation boils down to mysterious ways for the purpose of character building. Today's comment of the day comes to us from Clown Crusade, who says, "I'm not sure if I agree with your point there. All of the energy and parts of the reaction are there in the cause. It's just an inert and boring form. The explosion is a flashy release of the energy that to our perspective seems more intense, therefore greater. That doesn't mean Mr. Butt gains any points for the record." This was on a video where Kyle Butt made the claim that every effect must have a cause that is greater than itself, and my response was something along the lines of saying an explosion is greater than the spark that causes it, and yes, I can agree that depending on what you mean by greater, all of the energy and whatnot for the explosion was already contained in whatever exploded. Realistically, though, the law of conservation of energy actually would have it that the effects are lesser than their cause, as no energy conversion process operates with 100% efficiency. Every time something happens, there is a little bit less energy in the universe that is capable of being used to make something else happen. Thanks for watching. Special thanks as always to my patrons, who are the cause that keeps me affecting. If you'd like to cause me to affect, then you can sponsor the show for as little as $1 per episode at patreon.com/ViceRhino. You can follow me on Twitter at ViceRhino and find links to my website, social media, and P.O. Box address down in the description. One announcement before I go, I am going to be starting up a second channel shortly that's just going to be me and the missus playing video games and chatting and, realistically trash-talking each other more than chatting. Nothing special there, but some of you have expressed an interest, so it's going on a different channel since it's completely unrelated to my usual content. Not sure when it's going to start, but the channel is called Vice Rhino Gaming. I'll leave a link to that in the description if you want to preemptively subscribe. See you next time.